Welcome to an episode of Behind the Scenes, a weekly program unveiling the biggest political developments in Somali politics. I'm Sultan Mohammed, your host and co-producer here on Horford Media alongside Suleiman Hashi on this week's program. Elections are fast underway yet again for the third time, as leaders of the National Consultative Council met over a number of days at the beginning of this year before agreeing on a framework which have been accepted by all parties. Now, how will that work out, and is it possible to finish the election by the 25th of February? That is the topic on the program this evening. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to Horford Media's YouTube channel. Horford Media Company has also set up a Horford Media TV, which viewers can find the most important and interesting programs released by Horford Media, including Mahahi, Celeb Behind the Scenes, among other programs. Do subscribe to the channel and also follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, and Engineer Yasin, as well as the wider Horford Media team on our social media platforms, which will be visible on the screen. Let's get straight into it. The Somali election has been sluggish, to say the least, for nearly a year now. It felt like just yesterday when the president of Somalia, Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo, and regional leaders sat down to sign the 17th September agreement, which in theory should have finalized the election for completion by February 2021. Instead, we've seen and been witness to a roller coaster of a journey as Somalis across the globe eagerly wait for this crucial yet ever delaying election to actually take place. It was May 1st when, following a series of skirmishes between a small group of rebels supporting the opposition figures and the Somali government forces in the capital, that a new political paradigm was created. Rather than the president participating in the election implementation process as head of state, he would delegate the entirety of his role to his prime minister, Mohamed Hussein Roble. Somali eyes were glued to the TV as the future of the country was hung on the balance in the fateful 2 months of April and May, and for many, it was a stark reminder of the wars that ravaged the capital, which is now seemingly in recovery and rebuilding its beauty. The delegation of power saw the creation of the National Consultative Council, comprising of regional leaders and the Prime Minister. Now, the NCS has met numerous times and set up a framework for the election in May in an event attended by all political actors in Somalia, from President Farmajo to opposition figures like former President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud and former transitional President Sheikh Sharif Sheikh Ahmed. Forgiveness was asked, with many believing with this new framework embraced by all parties, it will put to bed the hatred and animosity amongst political leaders in Somalia. However, this was far from the truth, and by August 2021, the likelihood of the May framework being completed by October 8th was looking increasingly impossible. Critics of the Prime Minister and the NCS agreement point out the amount of power yielded by regional leaders over the election implementation. Regional leaders were able to influence varying institutional layers, ranging from the state election implementation team committee members to tribal elders electing both MPs and senators. The failure to complete the election was therefore pinned on regional leaders and the Prime Minister himself. For instance, despite the fact that regional leaders agreed to an election framework by the end of May, regional states only started towards the end of summer 2021. For instance, Jubaland was the first regional state to hold the upper house elections, with senators being elected on July 29th to be exact. Now, that is literally 2 months after the agreement was finalized and celebrations took place. Additionally, many critics have highlighted the customs of Somali regional leaders to hold elections in very small stages. So rather than holding elections in whole, they would simply do it in small numbers to either buy time or yield more influence on the outcome of the results. And that is some of the things critics point out. For example, referring to the July 29th election in Jubaland, there was only 4 senators elected out of a number of senators. So the question then arises, why are senators or MPs being elected in small chunks? And that's for regional leaders really to answer. Of course, there's going to be analysis and criticism of those leaders and their decisions, but ultimately the decision lies within their offices, and it's for them to explain why they take small steps, despite the fact that there's the resources available, the framework is there, the money is there. There's literally no reason to hold elections in chunks. Similarly, we've seen August and October 2021 framework for both houses of parliament to be completed by December 31st being completely missed, with similar problems aforementioned at play yet again. So the major question arises for many Somalis: will this new agreement be any different? Well, there has been positivity out of this agreement, and surprisingly for many, this positivity is in the right direction. For instance, there's been a push for more transparency. If we look more into the articles agreed upon, in Article 1, it stipulates that a list of all members of the local committees that elect elders to represent must be released prior to the election. Article 2 dictates clearly communication between seat and federal election implementation teams and a dispute team regarding list of elders. Article 3 emphasizes the independence of the election implementation teams. Article 5, for example, demands officials to ensure that all elders and candidates have successfully fulfilled the basic requirements before selection. And Article 8 again states that there cannot be an obstruction of candidates to meet elders committees for parliamentary seats. And of course, this relates back to some of the points raised by opposition figures regarding some candidates who they thought was the election process was done in an illegal manner, or a manner which they deemed at least to be unjust. Now, the agreement also has expressed concern about the continued infighting within the election committees, particularly on a federal level, with Article 8 addressing professionalism. Now, the infighting between committees has been going on for a while, and many have criticized the Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble for his dismissal of 7 members of the dispute committees, as well as the sacking of the Federal Election Implementation Team chairman, which resulted in what some would call a civil war between members of the committee that supported the Prime Minister's decision and those that rejected it. And this kind of played out on social media. I think we all saw the statements being released by the former chairman, Mohamed Iro, in contrast to some of the statements being made by other members of the committee. And there was fighting between who currently runs the social media. Now, the agreement also addressed the importance of impartiality from the armed forces, with Article 16 demanding all personnel to remain politically neutral as the election kicks off. And this is again a stark reminder to what was going on. In April, we saw some of the Somali army units that were in Lower Shabelle leave their posts and come to Mogadishu to participate in a politically driven, it's clearly politically driven issue that was going on in Hamar. And the reality is that we saw this rise again a few weeks ago when an issue between the Prime Minister and the President arose. We saw again members of such units again try and pour into the capital. And I think this is just a reference back to this problem. I think what's important here is that the politicization of the army in Somalia is historic. We've seen Siad Barre and his military take control of Somalia in the late 60s and control the government until 1991. The army has played an important role in Somalia's political establishment and history since its modern history as a state in 1960. And for many, they don't want to see a return back to the army taking political sides and resulting in war, whether that's tribal sides, whether that's political opinions. Now, however, the most controversial part of this agreement was Article 17, which requested for AMISOM units to patrol the presidential palace. Now, no one's taking credit away from AMISOM. AMISOM have played an important part in the past. They've obviously guarded the presidential palace, they've guarded Mogadishu for a very long time. However, the Somali National Army Presidential Guard units have been guarding the palace for many years now. And the need for AMISOM to replace them is politically driven because, of course, the Prime Minister and President have a political rift between them currently. And for the Prime Minister, he might see units that are in the presidential palace being, supportive of the President in some way or form. And again, while this NCS agreement asks for political neutrality, it's bringing units into political divisions that are occurring in the nation. Additionally, many critics have questioned whether the NCS has the legal power to even do this. The Commander-in-Chief of the Somali National Army legally and constitutionally is the President, and this is followed by the Chief of the Somali Armed Forces. Therefore, such a decision to move SNA forces and bring in AMISOM forces who also take orders, not just from AMISOM's headquarters, but also from the Ministry of Defense, would require direct consent from both senior officials. However, of course, this happening cannot be ruled out, as the President and the Prime Minister are currently interested in diffusing the situation rather than escalating. Compromise is a common theme in Somali politics. It isn't just simply, I want this and you want that and I'm going to do what I want to do. In Somalia, we're in a fragile democracy, we're in a fragile state. And it is possible that this could happen in a situation where a negotiation arose between the President and the Prime Minister, but we're yet to see this. And finally, the most important part of this agreement is an end date for this election. Finally, an end date that has been accepted by all. And this is February 25th. Now, this agreement is set up in the right direction. It was inclusive and it involved all political actors from opposition figures to civil society. And some might feel like some opposition figures are controversial. Some might feel that some members of the federal government are controversial. But the reality is that we are all Somalia. We need to have an inclusive process, and we cannot criticize an inclusive process. And therefore, incorporating all varying views would allow this election to move forward. However, many have criticized the presence of foreign ambassadors to discuss Somali internal affairs, and we all understand that foreign ambassadors and foreign governments, do fund some parts of the government in Somalia. However, that does not mean that foreign ambassadors need to be at an internal discussion of affairs in Somali politics. We know Israel, for example, is funded heavily by the United States in terms of military defense. Other countries are funded by the United States. That doesn't mean that the United States needs to be on the table in every single internal discussion happening in that country. And many critics have pointed this out. Now, the agreement attempts to rectify many issues regarding transparency and fair election. It has essentially shifted the powers slightly away from regional leaders. And this is a big criticism that has been made on the previous agreements in which regional leaders had substantial control over the election process and time frame. And this could have put a smile, at least, on the face of many Somalis, particularly opposition figures who felt abandoned by allies within the regional states that they had earlier last year. Now, President Farmajo in his speech wholeheartedly threw full support behind this new agreement, and similarly international partners have expressed support for this agreement. Now all eyes are on the regional leaders and the Prime Minister to fulfill the promises they have made yet again. Many watch with a cautious eye as a lot of empty promises were made throughout 2021, and we finished a year of nothing, essentially. We finished the year with nothing. And now the US has gone so far as to threaten sanctions against political players it considers spoilers. Now, whether that is interference in internal affairs or not, that is the level that international countries are taking, partners of Somalia right now, to try and threaten certain members, certain political actors to, wholeheartedly take part in this political process. Now, whether that is correct for the US to do or not is another debate, and that's for other people to interpret that. But that remains there. Jubaland has again kicked off this election process for a third time. The question now is 2022 finally the year we see a new president in Somalia?